Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage was developed by Insomniac and released on November 2nd, 1999 for the Sony PlayStation, only 14 months after the original game. It was a sequel to Spyro the Dragon, a great mascot platformer that took 3D platforming on the PlayStation to new heights. This sequel promised to be bigger and better than what had come before, and in many ways it succeeded in this endeavor, pumping in a lot more ideas that expanded on the world, the story, and the mechanics, building on the strong foundation established in the first title. The team at Insomniac knew they had something good, but knew they needed more to push it to greatness, and they did just that. They found new elements to introduce to the Spyro formula to achieve mastery. A simple story of good versus evil introduced new characters that gave the world more charm while raising the stakes for Spyro and Sparks. The team also wanted to emphasize challenge and completion in this sequel rather than collection. They achieved this through orb challenges, which were small mini-games that pushed the player's skill farther than anything in Spyro 1. To facilitate all this gameplay variety, a set of new skills were included to flesh out the player's moveset, including swimming and climbing. And these three ideas were the bedrock concepts that Insomniac used to take what they had built in Spyro 1 and to push it even further. And the end result, at least for me, is the best game of the original trilogy. It expanded on what had come before without evolving it into something unrecognizable. Sure, some elements weren't quite as well realized in this sequel, such as the ethereal atmosphere, but the new additions more than made up for it. Spyro 2 is one of my top 10 favorite games of all time, probably hovering around slot 5 or 6, and it's the most nostalgically fueled title for me personally. Sometimes rose-tinted glasses manipulate memories, but that's not the case here. Nostalgia is instead an added bonus to what remains an extremely easy game to revisit and to cherish. It's old and new memories coming together in a common location, a wonderful whimsical world that has remained a treat to revisit in the 26 years since its initial release. In this lengthy analysis, I'm going to be talking about why I love Spyro 2 so much, highlighting the design elements, the narrative direction, the new gameplay loop, its new approach to challenges, the little details, and much, much more. If it wasn't obvious, this video is a follow-up to my look at Spyro the Dragon that I put out last year. I strongly recommend watching that video before this one because I'm going to do my best to avoid rehashing talking points that I've already gone over. So if there's something obvious that I'm missing, it's probably because I already went over it in that video. And just like with that previous video, I begrudgingly am using footage from the Reignited trilogy, not because I want to, but because I don't have any other choice. I prefer the original, but I don't have any way to play it and simultaneously record footage with my current setup, so as a result, I'm using the remake. However, it does open up avenues to new talking points as we can dissect how Toys for Bob managed to maintain the strengths of the original, ways that they may have improved it, and where they came up short. So with that, let's jump into this long look at Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage. When you boot up the game, it doesn't take long to notice that Spyro 2 cares to tell a story much more than its predecessor. In the original, the player was treated to an opening cutscene that showed Nasty Nork turning all the dragons to crystal as Spyro took on the moniker of hero to save them all. This and a cutscene tying everything together at the end where all the story beats of player were given, as the adventure was more about the gameplay. In fact, the final cutscene saw all the dragons being turned back into crystal, nudging the player to start a new save file, emphasizing that the story was simply a means to an end. It was never the point, it was just there to provide a bit of context to the gameplay and not much more. Ripto's Rage decided to take its storytelling a bit further by introducing new characters, both allies and villains, while still making sure that gameplay remained king. The story's purpose here remains contextualizing the activities and the adventure, but this simple tale of good defeating evil allows for extra charm to take root. And that really is the story's purpose, to imbue the game with charm, enhancing the entire experience in the process and delivering a completely different atmosphere than the original. It all begins with Spyro and Sparx seeking an escape from a rainy day in the Dragon Kingdoms, and so they set their sights on the sunny beaches of Dragon Shores. We then cut to the world of Avalar, where Hunter, Elora, and the Professor attempt to summon a dragon. Hunter and Elora talk about how a dragon is their only hope of defeating Ripto, a nasty wannabe emperor who wants to take control of their world. They are interrupted though when our pair of heroes are intercepted and redirected to the world of Avalar instead of Dragon Shores. Here, Spyro meets the strangers, and after a fiery exchange with Hunter, the moment turns on a dime when Ripto shows up, obliterating the portal Spyro entered through. Ripto shows a little bit of animosity about Spyro being there, stating that he hates dragons, but is unable to do anything further after his scepter is consumed by his minion, Gulp. From there, the villainous gang of Crush, Gulp, and Ripto take their exit. Elora hands Spyro a magical guidebook before her and the others depart to pursue Ripto, and with that, the player is set free in the world of Glimmer. The lighthearted nature of this opening cutscene confirms that this story won't be any sort of grand tale, but instead a way to set up a new adventure in a new world against a new villain. It's kept light and straight to the point, simple as that. However, the new characters still serve a central purpose, to inject the adventure with a bit of heart, soul, and charm. Spyro 1 often felt lonely, and while it's a strength of that game's atmosphere, it's clear that Insomniac didn't want that feeling to continue in the sequel. The technology they had built allowed them to construct impressively open areas for the time, and the sequel sought to fill it with more than just collectibles, and thus, the new characters. Ripto steals the show here, but his clumsiness with his scepter symbolizes that he won't be some huge threat, adding to the charm. We'll talk more about them as we continue, but one final note before we get into the tutorial, I do feel that a lot of that charm afforded by the new characters has been forfeited in this remake. The original had charm, this Reignited version, not so much, but more on that later. Glimmer is a pretty damn good opening level, but it assumes the player is familiar with the returning controls from Spyro 1, the charge, the flame breath, and the jump glide combo. Even if you aren't, simple experimentation will make these essential controls obvious after just a few moments for players of any skill level. Instead, Glimmer is more focused on introducing the player to all the new things the team added in this sequel, including talismans, orbs, spitting, power-up gates, new movement mechanics, and everyone's favorite bear, money bags. In Avalar, every world you visit has inhabitants, creatures that call the stage home. They are placed around the map and are mostly there to do things like describing the problem their level is facing, or handing out talisman rewards, to offer up orb challenges, or to unlock new parts of a stage. These tiny creatures immediately suck out the vacant loneliness that was found in Spyro 1's worlds, but in return, they offer up an influx of personality and cuteness, which is appreciated. It's a fair trade-off. This opening area of the map is perfect for easing the player back into the Spyro experience. Gems are scattered everywhere, and picking them up is as satisfying as ever. Meanwhile, just like in the Artisan's homeworld, there's enemies who won't attack you, but instead run away. This gives new players a chance to learn the basic attacks, charge, and flame breath. However, there are larger enemies who aren't afraid to strike out at you. This is a good thing, as one of the core design principles of Spyro 2 was to increase the challenge that the player faced. Having enemies who can damage you right away helps signal that change in philosophy. We didn't see that in Artisan's homeworld, but it's found right away in Glimmer. After you get a grip on the basics, you push further into the cave, where new ideas are introduced at a fast rate. First of all, there's this little mouse in the corner who tells you to come back after you've learned the climb move. This odd pattern on the wall won't be traversable until you have it, cueing you in on the fact that Spyro will have abilities to unlock during this adventure. It also confirms that backtracking will be a required part of any completionist playthrough, which has its strengths and weaknesses, as we will come to see. Then we run into moneybags. There's no way across this room without lowering the bridge, and the bear only agrees to do that in exchange for 100 of our gems. Okay, there is a way to sequence break this level, but for the uninformed new player, that's not going to be the case. Now, at first glance, it seems crazy to ask the player to give up nearly all their loot within just a few minutes of starting the game. You spent time gathering it all up, and now this bear is just going to take it away. However, since moneybags will be encountered over and over again, it was important to establish him early to reinforce the importance of gem collection. Without this stiff barrier to entry, the player may feel like gems aren't worth collecting. I don't think that's a common mindset for a player to take, but it's still a possibility. By establishing moneybags early, it tells the player to keep collecting gems, as without them, they may see their progress get halted later on. As we come out the other side of the cave, we meet up with another gem cutter. This one gives us a talisman and thanks us for helping him. Talismans are the key to progressing the main story through the first two homeworlds. You need them to face the bosses of each area, making them a valuable but underwhelming collectible. Most of the time, they are rewarded simply for reaching the end of a level and talking to the NPC found there. Their importance is drummed up by Elora back in Summer Forest, and I would take exception to her promoting these as the primary collectible if it weren't for the small comment about collecting orbs as well. Eventually, talismans aren't handed out anymore, and instead the player needs 40 orbs to face the final boss. You could argue that Elora ought to talk more about the importance of orbs in addition to talismans, as their optional nature could see players ignoring them only to face a tall task of gathering 40 later on. That would be a huge pace breaker for anyone playing that way, but again, I imagine the chances of someone reaching Ripto's gate with only like 10 orbs is pretty slim. Still, I can't help but to feel like talismans are more like participation trophies than anything else. Speaking of orbs though, and they also make their first appearance here in Glimmer. Hidden, and I use that term loosely, throughout the levels are NPCs requiring your help. They will ask you to engage with the mechanics in unique ways to accomplish a task in exchange for an orb. For example, this mouse asks you to use the spitting mechanic to blast away 6 lizards, while this one wants you to light up 6 lamps with your flame breath. These are fairly simple tasks given that this is the first set of orb challenges in the entire game. They are meant to give the player a taste of the new mechanics while still gently introducing them into the entire experience, as any tutorial level should. To complete that last orb challenge, the player will have to use a power-up gate that temporarily gives them full flight. These power-up gates are charged up by defeating enemies. If you encounter them without killing enough foes, they remain inactive until you take more out. This was smart, as killing enemies in Spyro 2 does not reward gems like it did in Spyro 1. If not for power-up gates, a player could ignore combat altogether. These gates then force the player's hand, getting them closer to enemies and forcing a scuffle so that they can complete orb challenges later on, and in this way, combat doesn't go ignored. All in all, a lot of new concepts are thrown into Glimmer, whether you're a brand new player or a returning veteran. But the second-to-second gameplay loop of collecting gems, exploring, defeating enemies, and finding new challenges is so engaging that the new additions feel like they're just going with the flow. There are a lot of ideas thrown at you, but it never feels overwhelming because each of them is presented in an easily digestible way, clicking right into the established ideas from the first title. It's masterful and expansive design that shows you nearly everything you need to know about Spyro 2 and how it differs from Spyro 1 before you even leave the first stage. Leaving Glimmer brings us to Summer Forest, and my god, the music here brings on waves of nostalgia. I would love to play some of it for you, but apparently copyright claims on Spyro music have gotten really out of control in the last few years, so sadly I'm not going to do that. But anyway, the themes from each of Spyro 2's hub worlds are easily my favorite in the series, and overall, this game's soundtrack is in my top 2 of all time. It's right there with Persona 5. Take a listen to it after the video. It's some of the most peaceful vibes ever generated in a video game. I love it. For now, we're a bit limited in what we can do in Summer Forest. Much like in Spyro 1, each homeworld has its own collectibles to grab up, orbs and gems here. However, we can only nab a few of the gems without attaining the swimming ability, and since we can't afford that, it shoehorns us into another level. It's kind of a nuisance for people like me, who like to get everything in one go before leaving the area, but it was a pretty wise decision to limit where the player can go, at least for now. The rest of Summer Forest is gate-kept behind the lake, and without the ability to swim, you can't reach it. Moneybags will teach you how to, but only if you give him 500 gems first. Without this restriction, players who are brand new to video games may find themselves walking endlessly around Summer Forest, unsure of where to go. This may sound like a stupid thing to say in 2025, but keep in mind that Spyro 2 originally released in 1999, in an era where 3D gaming was still relatively new. People were still getting used to this setup, especially PlayStation gamers, and so this concession makes more sense given the time. It forces the player to enter either Colossus or Idle Springs, which helps establish the structure of the world, a central homeworld with levels branching off of it, much like Spyro 1. Unlike the predecessor though, Spyro 2 starts you off in a level instead of a homeworld. I think forcing the player to enter another level before finishing Summer Forest helps to reinforce the intended loop without gatekeeping all that much. There's an intended flow to the levels, and small decisions like this help to maintain it. Of course, while we're here, we do pick up some valuable information. Allura reinforces the importance of talismans, Zoe teaches us about Sparks' function as a health bar, and Hunter teaches us to glide and hover. In fact, you're forced to glide to continue into Summer Forest, which is a good thing. Gliding is a central part of Spyro's moveset, and making sure players can do this before continuing further into the game is as critical as it was in Spyro 1 when the same dilemma was incorporated into Town Square. It's taken further here though through the introduction of the hover mechanic. This handy tool allows Spyro to get some extra airtime and a little more distance out of a glide, which is critical for 100% completion. So it was important to also introduce this as early as possible. Now, some say that Hunter gatekeeping orbs from you until you complete his challenges is ridiculous, and to that I say, you're right, I completely agree. He's supposed to be on our side, so give me all the damn orbs, Hunter, don't make me have to earn them. At least in the early stages of the game, it makes a bit of sense, given that the two have a bit of a rivalry since meeting each other, but I don't know, it's still kinda weak. Hunter wants to be the hero, but is too much of a doofus to accomplish that, although this iteration does not portray that well, as we will come to see. But for now, it's time to leave Summer Forest for our next level. Let's head to Idle Springs. The denizens of this world have come under attack from the tikis that they've built. It's up to Spyro to go save the construction workers, thus freeing up a path through the level in the process. After going through the critical path, the player should have enough gems to unlock the swimming ability, so after a quick visit to Moneybags, I return to complete this level in full. It's another small moment of backtracking, as you can't finish Idle Springs on a first visit, unless of course you go to Colossus first, then buy the swim move. I'll talk more about the swimming mechanic in an upcoming level, but for now, I wanted to highlight how it adds more verticality. In Spyro 1, many levels had a critical path and some offshoots that often saw the player moving upwards. In Spyro 2, that's maintained, as there's plenty of overhead paths where more gems are hidden, giving you a new view of the world while you traverse it. That structure is used in Idle Springs, and at the end of it, we get this long glide back to a remote island to grab up some treasure, and it's a cool little touch. But with the inclusion of swimming, it allows for descents to take root in the level design, not just moving up, but also downwards. Players can dip underwater to collect gems and then take tunnels to reach other locations. It's a nice way of expanding the potential structure of any given stage. It just gives them more ways to shape a level. Here in Idle Springs, taking these alternate routes, both the high and low roads, allows us to reach more orb challenges. One sees us racing around a track using the supercharged power-up gate to smash up statues and free hula girls who then destroy an invulnerable tiki. The other hosts a series of simple puzzles. Well, at least they're simple now for my adult brain. As a kid, I remember randomly jumping around on the blocks just trying to figure out what the combination was without giving it much thought, but now it's a breeze. And get used to seeing these orb challenges as you move from level to level, as there's a plentiful number to complete and collect across each stage. This coincides with Insomniac's design philosophy for Spyro 2, where they sought to increase the challenge. In a PlayStation Underground interview detailing the game's development prior to release, Insomniac president Ted Price said, quote, "For Spyro 2, we really kinda threw away all the rules and we learned it's okay to be crazy. Spyro 1 was all about collecting objects. Spyro 2 is all about completion. We have what we call talisman challenges and orb challenges. The talisman challenges are more straightforward, they are required to complete a level. Orb challenges are more difficult, they're off the main path, and they're something that the hardcore players can really sink their teeth into." End quote. And in the same interview, producer Michael John said, quote, "So in every level, whereas in Spyro 1 you just did the same thing, in Spyro 2 you're now doing at least 3 very different things from each other." End quote. These quotes are a great representation of the core gameplay loop of Ripto's Rage. Gems, talismans, and orbs are your main collectibles. Gems return from Spyro 1, while talismans aren't super interesting, and so orb challenges feel like the greatest new addition here. They signal a pivot away from the gimmick ideas of Spyro 1 towards a more mini-game approach. In Spyro 1, many of the levels featured a gimmick of sorts, especially during the back half. Now, gimmick often has a bad connotation, but that isn't the case here. It's just how they approach the level design. You can think of things like the supercharged ramps of treetops, the super flame in Haunted Towers, or the rising platforms of Jacques Stage. Here in Spyro 2, with the advent of orbs, ideas like this no longer need to be included, or at least relied on, and could instead be reworked into structured challenges with a new collectible tied to them. This structuring takes the form of mini-games, which aids in building the more challenging experience that the development team clearly sought. It was a great solution in my opinion, and expanding Spyro's moveset through swimming, spitting, and more really allowed these mini-games to shine. There aren't really any I dread doing, as each feels different enough from any other, and that variety greatly boosts the gameplay, at least to me. And the best part is, the exploration of Spyro 1 isn't even lost, owed to how many of these orb challenges are tucked away deeper in levels. It's great stuff, and it's a large reason for why I love Spyro 2 so much. Now back in Summer Forest, we're free to finish up most of this homeworld now that the swim move is unlocked. I always loved that the homeworlds across the original trilogy were stages of their own. It would have been really easy to make something like Crash's portal rooms and call it a day, but that wouldn't have fit with Spyro's more open design ethos. Having explorable homeworlds helps preserve the fantasy as you move from level to level. That's more true in Ripto's Rage than the original, given that these homeworlds now feel much bigger, each having different sections. In Summer Forest alone, there's the small meadow outside of the Glimmer portal, the glide room, the large open area with the lake, the castle interior, and explorable waterways. By creating different sections within each homeworld, it makes them feel larger than what we've seen before, opening up new avenues for player discovery and exploration. My favorite example of that in Summer Forest takes the form of this orb. You can see it bouncing while completing Hunter's Orb Challenge, and without any obvious path to it, you might assume the entrance is underwater. This part of the map houses a giant lake with an entrance to the castle, so perhaps there's a hidden entrance somewhere to reach this orb. Well, no, not here at least. Instead, you have to go back towards the Glimmer portal and take a hidden path in this unassuming little stream. Intuition tells you the path should be in the lake, but proper exploration reveals the true entrance, and it's great. I don't think I ever found this as a kid, but instead as an adult when I revisited these games in college. Turns out there were still new secrets to uncover in one of my favorite games ever. Another great moment is figuring out the solution to reach this orb. You don't even know it's back there, as there's no way to see it unless you've found the solution. With all the red buttons around, the obvious answer seems to be hitting them in some combination that leaves both of these doors open, but that isn't the case. Genuine curiosity is the only thing that compels you to leap from the window and glide to the next ledge over to reach the unlocked door and another orb. It's awesome. Of course, we can't do everything in Summer Forest just yet, as we need the climb move to reach the last pieces of treasure and the final orb, so for now, let's move on. With that, let's venture into Colossus and, what did they do to the chanters of this world? My god, they screwed it up. This sounds horrible. Okay, let's pause on that for a second and talk about Colossus before touching on these NPC redesigns. This stage is really fun, mostly because of its orb challenges that once again are well hidden. One of the best parts about Ripto's Rage is discovering these trails off the beaten path, because you know that once you find an NPC hiding, you're about to get a cool new minigame. Helping the professor by tracking down all the statues is enjoyable because it gets you exploring to find every hidden alcove in the level. However, let's face facts, the real highlight here is, and always has been, hockey. When Spyro is moving on ice, he can't jump, so he must make his way back to solid ground by skating along. This movement manipulation means that hockey could be crafted as a minigame. It's simple enough: skate on the ice and claim the puck, launching it into the opposing goalie's net to score. There's a handful of times in Spyro 2 where a minigame was deemed worthy of carrying 2 orb challenges instead of just one, and this one certainly seems justified. The first challenge makes you score 5 goals in 2 minutes, which was absolutely heart-pounding on this attempt, as I just barely finished in time. I mean, look at this, 1/10 of a second remaining, that's a crazy finish. And then the second challenge has you playing a full game, first to 5 wins. It's pretty easy to win, but the competitiveness of it is a novel experience for the series. So yeah, hockey is great. The people of this world must think so too, as many of their statues and decor reflect their love of it. Interestingly enough, you can also notice paintings of levels from Spyro 1, which indicates Avalar isn't some faraway dimension unknown to the Dragon Kingdoms. Well, either that or it's an Easter egg. Anyway, back to the hockey decorations, and it's clear Toys for Bob took some creative freedom to flesh out these worlds with small details like this. I'm a fan of that, as we'll go over later, but the most glaring part of Spyro 2's presentation in the remake is the lack of charm. This will be a recurring topic throughout the video, but it feels necessary to first mention it here, given how butchered the denizens of Colossus are. The iconic chants of the original game, the why, are completely stripped away here. The voice lines remain the same, but they're presented way too calmly to convey the original personality of these characters. But the changing of the chant is by far the most egregious element of this stage. They went from such an iconic sound to this. This chant sounds horrible. It'd be one thing if they changed it and it at least sounded good, but to replace it with this is a slap to the face. I understand it's one small component of a single level, but it's evidence of a greater issue in this remake. In the remake of Spyro 1, Toys for Bob took liberties with how they presented the dragons that you rescued. It was acceptable there as the foundation from the original was already lackluster. They took that framework and improved upon it by giving dragons bigger personalities and designs to reflect their homeworld and their roles in the society. It was cool. However, this same liberty was taken in Ripto's Rage, but the success level here is only like 50%. And to be clear, for now, I just want to focus on the stage-specific NPCs like the Gem Cutters of Glimmer or the Builders of Idle Springs. When examining these designs, many were maintained or improved, but others were huge misses. To me, this includes some or all of the NPCs in Colossus, Zephyr, Sunny Beach, Skelos Badlands, Crystal Glacier, and Scorch, alongside of some of the recurring NPCs like Hunter and Ripto. We'll discuss those recurring ones later, but the result of this meddling is that some levels lose a lot of the charm that they had simply from changing up the character models, let alone other design decisions like altering sound effects or the tone of voices. Zephyr in particularly really strikes me as bad. They flubbed it. The original characters here were implied to be ugly, but remained cute and charming because of their simple design. Pumping in more detail allowed only that ugly side to endure, and to me, it's painful to look at. To be fair, the game also has its fair share of improvements. The Electrolls of Hurricos look spot on, the robots of Metropolis are still amazing, and the satyrs of Fracture Hills maintain their charm, even if their music has changed, although I think it might be for the better. So yeah, upgrades do exist, but it just makes the misses stand out even more. It hurts the overall appeal of the remake because, again, the central point of the story and of the characters was simply to add more visual appeal and delightful charm to the experience, not to tell some grand narrative, and so when you lose out on that, as occasional as it may be, it can make an entire level feel unrecognizable. Hurricos marks the first difficulty bump in the game. It was safe for the developers to increase the challenge here, given that the player is guaranteed to have visited at least 3 worlds, Glimmer, Summer Forest, and either Colossus or Idle Springs, to acquire enough gems to get the swim move. Therefore, it was an appropriate time to up things, pushing for that more challenging experience that they clearly wanted. Hurricos does this in a few different ways. First, with the enemy design. The small enemies who are susceptible to both flame and charge are removed here, replaced with robots who can only die from a charge attack. Meanwhile, larger enemies still must be taken out by flame. These enemy types are intermingled in close proximity, forcing the player to alternate back and forth between attacks in quick succession to avoid taking damage. At the same time, the layout of Hurricos contains many ledges that house gems and orb challenges, some of which are fairly well hidden. Take for example the gliding challenge, where Spyro earns 2 orbs by shutting down a factory after reaching it with aerial moves, including the hover. It's a nice gauntlet that pushes the player a bit more than what's come before. I also love how the game utilizes gems to outline the path a player is meant to take. It helps keep the flow state without using UI elements that would detract from the experience. Much like how Sparks is your health bar, using gems as a guide is a helpful way to keep the field of view clean so that the player can take in the worlds instead of focusing on menus. It was a real strength of the original trilogy, and it's good to see it carried over here. Of course, to even reach this challenge, the player must navigate the world using the power-up gate. I briefly went over these before: kill enough enemies to power them up, and then use them to reach new parts of a level, including extra gems and orb challenges. They incentivize engaging with combat instead of avoiding it, and allows for extra quirks in the level design. The nice thing is that the power-up gates don't just do one thing. There's multiple kinds. One that grants flight, one that starts a supercharge, one that boosts your flame breath, one that makes you invincible, one that acts like a springboard launching Spyro upward, and even one that temporarily switches your fire breath to an ice breath. These are plopped into worlds and used in creative ways. Here in Hurricos, you must use the supercharge gate to smash up some windmills to reach the gliding challenge. It's cool because nothing but intuition is pushing you to do this. The windmills can't be destroyed with normal charge or flame, but there's clearly pathways and buttons behind them. At some point, it just all clicks. You're supposed to use the supercharge to smash them up. But the realization of what to do is just the first half, as now you have to execute some tough turns at fast speeds to get the job done. And then your reward is another challenge and 2 orbs. It's fantastic. The power-up gates were an awesome solution for how to expand the level design, how to empower the player, and how to tie it all together into these alternate gameplay objectives. Insomniac did great with that. However, Toys for Bob did screw something up in Hurricos, quite badly in fact. The last orb challenge, where the player must stop the gear grinders and replace the lightning stones, has been completely butchered. In the original Spyro 2, this was one of the tougher challenges, as is made evidenced by the 4-star difficulty rating. That's because the gear grinders would actually steal the lightning stones after you place them, forcing you to take them down and, well, replace them. Sure, killing 10 ended their threat, but there was a bit of panic instilled when the alarm went off, knowing a gear grinder was getting away with a stone. They completely screwed this up in the remake. The gear grinders do absolutely nothing. They simply run around in circles endlessly and spawn one at a time, making it so you can defeat 10 and then place the stone afterwards. It trivializes the encounter and completely ruins this orb challenge. And when stepping up the difficulty was the whole point of Spyro 2, pulling a stunt like this is a disservice to the original game's design and legacy. I don't know why it was never patched, but it remains half-assed to this day. Sunny Beach is up next, and it's another solid and fun level that emphasizes your modes of attack, both in combat, but also in the objectives. The charge and flame breath are used to manipulate the position of these turtles, getting them onto switches so that more of the level unlocks. Meanwhile, the power-up gate and first orb challenge gives Spyro a super flame attack, which always makes you feel extra powerful. In particular, blowing up the chest using the enhanced flame breath is satisfying, especially when you realize you can also use it underwater. It's a small thing, but helps convey the significance of the power-up. I mean, fire underwater? That must be pretty damn strong. Unfortunately, it's another level where backtracking is required, and so I can't get all the gems and orbs on a first visit, which is a bummer. Looking back on footage of the original Sunny Beach makes it transparent that Toys for Bob did cook in some regards. I will always lament the charm that has been lost, especially when it comes to NPC redesigns, whether they are friends or foes, but it's not hard to see how the extra environmental details helps bring these worlds to life even more than the original. It's small things that can go easily unnoticed without having revisited the original before playing the Reignited version. Like in the original, there was a wall right here, making this part of the level feel more enclosed. But now it's removed and placed with a shot of the ocean, helping to reinforce the intended feel of a level called Sunny Beach. At the same time, corridors now have a lot more details built into their structure to give them some added personality, like these tiki totem poles. And every level has things like this if you stop and take the time to notice them. I want to extend Toys for Bob some credit for these additions because I do think they help make the worlds feel more real and in some instances, more visually appealing. Adding too much extra detail would have ran counterintuitive to the design of the original. Considering the time and technology restraints that Insomniac had to work with, 1999 Spyro 2 is pretty damn detailed. That being said, it still had simplicity in its design that you just don't see in games nowadays, given the better hardware and developmental tools. By overindulging on these new advancements, it would have been really easy to add too much to these stages, creating overcrowding eyesores that took away from the simple aesthetic of the original. In my opinion, Toys for Bob did a mostly fantastic job of modernizing the looks of these levels without losing that simplicity, at least here in Spyro 2. Again, I do think they missed the mark a lot on the charm generated from NPCs. Things like voice acting, animations, sound effects, and general designs of those NPCs, they pale in comparison to the original very deeply. However, when specifically looking at the extra details that they added to the environments on a stage-to-stage basis, I can't help but to feel impressed, at least most of the time. There are still changes that I disagree with though, even here in Sunny Beach. Like for example, the chests containing the baby turtles have a different look, blending into the environment far more than the original. Here, they look natural, as if they belong. Mechanically, it may make them harder to spot, theoretically increasing the difficulty of the orb challenge. However, within the context of the world building, it's a poor change. The original game had metallic boxes that felt out of sorts, which was the point. The water workers were a menace to Sunny Beach, trapping beautiful creatures in cold metal jails. Thus, when you saved them, it felt more heroic, whereas now, it sort of feels like I'm blowing up some ancient treasure that washed ashore here. So, while I do think a lot of environmental changes are for the better, it's not hard to see how changing things can be a double-edged sword. That's the thing with taking risks. Sometimes it works out, and other times it doesn't. The Reignited trilogy gives you a mixed bag of these reactions. Aquaria Towers is one of the more interesting levels to play on your first run, especially if you're coming over from Spyro 1. In the predecessor, touching any sort of liquid resulted in damage, even if it was just this simple pool of water in the artisan's homeworld. Now, Spyro is free to jump into water, skim the surface, and even dive deep down for so long as he wants without consequence. It's a pretty drastic change, and while the player has already swam before reaching Aquaria Towers, this is the stage where it's fleshed out the most. In this way, it's a perfect final level for Summer Forest, taking the most bold mechanic introduced in this homeworld, and really the game at large, and designing an entire level around it. It's committed level design that revolves around the new mechanic, swimming, and it's something we'll see again later to a lesser degree with Magma Cone and the climb move. Unfortunately for the head bash though, it gets no such level. Anyway, back to Aquaria Towers, and I think the swimming mechanics are good. A bit tweaked here in Reignited, but still easy to work with. First of all, hand up, did you know that you could swim underwater without charging by holding the X button instead of square? I never knew that, but apparently it's in both versions of the game. If you knew that, or you didn't, let me know in the comments below. Here in Reignited, Spyro carries more momentum after a charge, meaning that more casual swimming move becomes more useful for course correcting and moving about. This combination of approaches is appreciated, especially now that I know they both exist. I mean, it's simple to get around while you're swimming if you don't utilize the faster speed, but doing so allows you to zip around at the cost of less control and potential for more danger. So all in all, I think the original controls felt a little bit better, but it's a marginal difference. It still works in the Reignited trilogy. With that being said, this playthrough of Aquaria Towers really stunned me because this may be one of the best examples of level design in the entire game. I would have never said that before this playthrough, but looking at it more critically reveals that they absolutely nailed it. For a majority of the level, you'll be swimming instead of moving on land. Like I said, swimming is good, but it's not as fun as basic movement since it's more restrictive on your sense of control and removes your flammability. That's why I didn't view this level as favorably before this run, but even with that caveat, this is an exemplary stage. That's for a few reasons, the first being that the basic structure is different from most levels. You can see where the exit portal will spawn before even leaving the first area. That's pretty unique, and it informs you that this level will be like a big loop connecting back to itself, meaning that verticality will be at the heart of it more so than moving horizontally. That alone adds a lot of depth, as you find yourself having to swim up and down to make sure that you've really searched every nook and cranny of every part of the stage. It forces you to consider your environment and surroundings more than most levels. It's also heavy on the amount of enemies, with 30 total in the stage, far more than anything we've seen so far. And since many of them have to be dealt with while swimming, it offers up a change to the tone of combat, as you feel more vulnerable given the restrictions on your character. Usually, I don't like these sorts of challenges in games, where the difficulty comes from having your abilities and your maneuvers stripped away, but I think it works here because the level design and atmosphere are very strong. A big reason for that strength in atmosphere is that this level includes two moments that get an emotional reaction out of you. One, realizing there's an entire open sea area right above you, and two, coming face to face with the mechanical sharks for the first time. The sharks provide a moment of hesitation and intimidation, as they behave unlike anything else you've seen so far. Unlike the goofy nature of most enemies, these sharks are cold threats that move swiftly, harshly, and are hell-bent on killing you. This powerful aura is reflected mechanically because if they catch you, it's an instant death, regardless of how much health Sparks has. And of course, it also plays on our natural fear of sharks. When underwater, we are out of our element and completely outclassed physically by this creature. These moments where you encounter them are terrifying. But then the game does an awesome thing, flipping the switch, making you the underwater predator once you've beaten enough regular enemies to unlock the power-up gate. This one grants you the Super Flame, just like it did in Sunny Beach, but there, it was just a warm-up. Here in Aquaria Towers, you get a full taste of how powerful the move is when underwater, blowing up these sharks in an instant, which is really satisfying. And if they spot you and swim at you, it provides a moment of tension as you frantically try to take them out. It's great stuff. Meanwhile, realizing there's an entire area above you is also exhilarating, but in a completely different way. It's very easy for this part of the level to go completely unnoticed, as I'll go so far as to say it might be the hardest optional area to find in the entire game. They hint at it by showing a cutscene of the water flooding in from above, and from the fact that you can't find any orb challenges in these bottom sections. You go exploring for them, and once you find it, it's magical. Plenty of gems and 3 orb challenges that feel like solid tests for this stage of the game. Hunter's Manta Ray riding is a quick vehicle section that doesn't overstay its welcome, and King Flippy's challenge will test your platforming skills while swimming. It's an awesome area, one of the most special in the game, at least to me, but I feel like many others would be inclined to agree. Our next 2 levels will be dramatically different than anything we've seen yet. The first is a Speedway level, Ocean Speedway. These flight levels return from Spyro 1, but have been iterated on here in the sequel to provide a fresh new experience. Returning are the basic flight challenges where you must destroy a collection of 4 different objects before the timer runs out. This challenge is presented more concisely here in Spyro 2. Unlike in Spyro 1, you get some warning that this level won't be like anything you've seen yet, because outside of the gate, Allura tells you that there's no talisman, but if you go really fast, you can get a lot of treasure. It auto-raised some flags to what you're about to enter when you go into the portal, and therefore you aren't as likely to be caught off guard by this different setup. At the same time, the race starts with you facing the rings, so you'll naturally fly through one, beginning the challenge and quickly cluing you in on what you're meant to do. From there, the player has to figure out the proper order to collect everything before the timer runs out. But here in Ocean Speedway, it's laid out bluntly. It's a great way to introduce the flight levels, and we'll see if the next 3 are able to build on it. However, Ripto's Rage also changed these levels by including an orb challenge in each of them. Without checking your guidebook, it would be easy to assume that after completing the flight challenge that you're finished. I wonder how many players left Ocean Speedway not knowing that they could get an orb here. By flying up to the NPCs near the level's beginning, you can find that one will talk with Spyro. She says that if you can defeat Hunter in a race, that she'll give you an orb. The idea of this is a cool concept. It feels like a secret that's been hidden in each flight level, and it's up to you to find them without much guidance. However, I take exception to this one because of how its objectives are communicated to the player. The Queen says that you'll need to race against Hunter, insinuating that you need to beat him to the end. This isn't the case though. You simply need to follow Hunter, flying through each ring before they disappear. It doesn't matter if he beats you. In fact, I don't think you can outdo him because he acts as the guide for the very windy and curvy racetrack that isn't transparent to follow. This shouldn't have been presented as a race, but instead is a simple game of follow the leader. And with that, we're almost done with Summer Forest. There will be backtracking to finish up levels, but we'll save that for the end. For now, let's dive into Crush's Dungeon, the first boss encounter in Spyro 2. They took bosses much farther here in Ripto's Rage, increasing the challenge exponentially over the previous title. Spyro 1 bosses were pushovers. Sure, they took an extra hit or two to kill versus regular enemies, but they were rarely a threat, more of a dressed up grunt who needed to be dealt with. The chiller, collection-based gameplay loop of Spyro 1 would have been partially offset if bosses were more challenging. It just wouldn't have fit the vibe. But here in Spyro 2, their inclusion is welcome as the sequel attempts to push its players. Before the fight, we get a cutscene detailing how Ripto came to Avalar. The professor was experimenting with portals, using the orbs to power them to try to reach other dimensions outside of Avalar. Hunter barges in and enters a new code which intercepts Ripto and his minions, bringing them to these worlds. By the way, the code Hunter enters is his birthday, 22475, or February 24th, 1975, making him 24 at the time of the game's release and 50 years old as of this video's publication. Hunter is 50. Oh my god, I feel old now. At the same time, we see that Elora had Zoe and the fairies remove the orbs and hide them all over Avalar so that Ripto couldn't get him. I always like this touch because it explains why many of the world's denizens can't make sense of the orbs. They are a product of the professor's research and inventions, not a normal sight to these folks, so it makes sense that they're confused. I always like this little detail. These cutscenes expand on the story while giving us more time with the characters, which is good. By the way, I love the way you enter Crush's dungeon. It isn't a portal, it's just a big hole in the ground. There's something intimidating about that. Crush himself is a fine introduction to how boss fights function without challenging the player too much. He is invulnerable to Spyro's basic attacks, and so you must use his own strength against him. Running around the arena, Crush searches for power-up pads that allows him to send an electric shockwave or fireballs towards Spyro. While doing so, he's invulnerable, but he can be flamed during the traveling intermissions. If done correctly, he smashes the ground attempting to hurt you, only to collapse part of the ceiling in on himself. He also chases you later on before smashing the ground. It's a pretty easy rhythm to get used to, even on a first encounter, making Crush an underwhelming bout. Of course, it's easy for me to say this as an adult. I remember dying to him a few times when playing back in my childhood. Okay, we're in Autumn Plains, and damn, here we go again. The theme of this area is my favorite piece of video game music ever. It is serene, it is tranquil, and it provides a level of peace to my soul that most other music could only dream of. Again, I'd love to play it, but I can't. So again, after this video, please go check it out. Autumn Plains is the closest Spyro 2 comes to capturing the magic felt in the ambience and atmosphere of Spyro the Dragon. That loneliness and isolation has been stripped away, but the peaceful and relaxing vibes remain, creating a fantastic level to just veg out in. After a boss fight, this is a great way of giving the player a chance to wind down, exploring a new world without any imminent danger. Unlike the first game, Spyro 2's hub worlds don't contain any enemies. The only way you can take damage is from gliding into a bottomless pit. It's a change that goes under the radar, but when taking a closer look, this was a really smart design decision. Like I just said, it gives the player a safe space to just roam around, explore, and enjoy the vibes without anything that may disrupt that. I've said it a million times now, but the developers intended for Ripto's Rage to be more challenging, and they accomplished that goal. However, in amping up what's expected of the player, it was also important to reward some downtime, a chill valley to unwind in from the mountains of enemies, orbs, and talismans found in the stages. For my money, Autumn Plains captures that spirit better than any homeworld across the series. Maybe I'm biased because fall is my favorite season, but the atmosphere is impeccable. The falling leaves, the tucked away secrets, diving in the pool, and chasing fodder around. It's all immaculate. I look forward to visiting this location every time I play the game. Of course, if you haven't been 100% completing as many levels as you can before leaving them, some of Autumn Plains may be locked off to you, which I think was intended. You'll be seeing a lot of money bags roaming around, unlocking access to 3 levels in this world in exchange for gems, as well as the ability to climb. More on the money bear soon, but climbing, like swimming, is introduced in a smart way. The rest of the castle is inaccessible without it, so you'll have to nab it to press on further. Smartly, you must use the move twice to progress, once to learn the basics of climbing up it, but also for how to jump from ladder to ladder. Some levels will utilize jumping between ladders like this, and forcing a player to do so before they encounter it in levels was smart, because there's no pressure here. Of course, there's more gatekeepers in Autumn Plains. Allura and the Professor both require you to have a certain number of orbs to access new levels, including one of the speedways. I really appreciate the Professor's blockade that requires you to have collected 8 orbs. Unlike Allura simply saying to grab orbs as well as talismans at the game's outset, this is quite literally a barrier you cannot get past without the proper qualifications. The number you need is low enough that most players ought to have this even if they've been lackadaisical about gathering the orbs, while still serving a reminder of how important they will be later on. Literally, the Professor says that verbatim. It's all in an effort to prevent players from reaching Ripto, only to find out that they need to go back and gather a huge amount of orbs just to finish the game. That happened to me as a kid, and I lamented having to go back. I think sectioning up Autumn Plains like that was smart. It slows down players who are bull rushing through the experience, ignoring the added challenges, but also not restricting players from seeing the entire map in one go if they've been doing everything, or mostly everything up to this point. I hate to leave my favorite level of the game, but Skelos Badlands beckons. This is clearly a stage that Insomniac was quite proud of, as it showed up in pre-release marketing and was also the world selected to house Spyro in the main menu of the original game. I wish Reignited still had these introductions, by the way. They did a great job of getting me excited for another Spyro adventure. Instead, we just get this static menu, and it's a major downgrade. The Badlands also offer a step up in challenge. I died twice during this stage, and it's because the game introduces lava for the first time. It's ground you can't walk on, and when paired up with enemies who must be hit as they fly, it can lead to some frantic moments. We're in the second homeworld now, and this was a good way of pushing the player a little bit further, slowly pulling back the safety nets offered up in the worlds of Summer Forest. Skelos Badlands has a great vibe, but I think the reason it's remembered so fondly is because of the new concepts it introduces. The power-up gate here makes Spyro temporarily invincible to all damage, allowing you to navigate the lava to reach hidden gems and those pesky lizards. Speaking of them, the orb challenge associated with them utilizes the new spit mechanic. There's a few levels where Spyro can find rocks on the ground, pick them up in his mouth, and spit them out both freely or using the look around feature to aim. This mechanic is used just enough times to not feel like a gimmick, but it certainly could have been featured in a few more areas to give the player more chances to experiment with it. Finally, another new thing this level introduces is the teleporting gem pots called question mark bases, but more on those later. However, perhaps the thing Skelos Badlands is most remembered for is the egg test, where you must chase down dinos before they consume cavemen. To be blunt, they made it way too easy in the Reignited trilogy, as this was the bane of many kids' existences back in the day. The flow of the game feels faster and more fluid in Reignited, plus the timing window seems to have been made more generous, allowing what used to be one of the hardest things to do in the game to be easier than hitting water after falling out of a boat. They also changed the pattern on the final challenge, making it simpler. I'm not sure why Toys for Bob felt the need to dumb down the difficulty at times, but that's another thing we'll discuss later. For now, I want to talk about how the worlds of Ripto's Rage act as sister worlds to one another in most cases. Some stages are meant to be foils to one another, whether they are tied together through similarities or differences. Some examples include the inhabitants of Colossus and Idle Springs being the same creature, how Mystic Marsh and Cloud Temples function around magic, how Zephyr and Breeze Harbor are at war, and my favorite, how Metropolis and Robotica Farms feature robots of different professions and lifestyles. There's other examples of this, but the point I want to make is that it goes a long way towards the game's world building. That and how NPCs will mention the name of other stages. A lot of the levels in Spyro 1 were different aesthetically, but culturally they all felt the same outside of Nasty Nork stages. You know, they were open environments that were filled with natural landscapes, but that's about it. Here, that's not the case. Obviously, having NPCs helps with that, but forging relationships between members of different levels expands on Avalar's nature, informing us of these in a charming way. You get the sense that Spyro truly is a stranger in this world. Avalar has its own strong ties, but it also has war of all things. It's crazy. I don't really have much more to say about these relationships other than how much I appreciate them. They add further charm while helping to make each level feel real and lived in rather than just being an open section of land to house collectibles. Avalar feels more believable because of it. Speaking of sister locations, why not head to Crystal Glacier next, the tie-in with Skelos Badlands? To be honest, it's hard not to feel like this level sort of got the shaft compared to its counterpart. It feels smaller, like it's lacking those optional offshoots of other stages, and it only has 2 orbs, which is on the lighter side. Not to mention, one of them is extremely forgettable. George the Snow Leopard gets lost and you must return it to his master. You do this simply by following him around and feeding him fish until he's consumed 3, whereafter he will just follow you back to his master. Flaming all the spiders in a single go is harder, but still not that bad. If you've completed any of the speedways, this feels a lot like that. So all in all, Crystal Glacier feels too familiar compared to stages we've already seen when stripping out the ice aesthetic. At least the dialogue makes me chuckle every time. All the grunts are helping you to free the chief because he has tickets to the hockey game that they want to attend, but once you bust him out, he reveals that he traded those tickets for a talisman. It's good comedic writing that isn't affected by the alterations to the voice cast. This lighter level also gives me the opportunity to talk about a new mechanic involving sparks that was introduced in Ripto's Rage, the Gem Finder. Here in the Reignited trilogy, Sparks has this ability in all 3 games, but originally it was absent in the first game, formed in the second, and made an unlockable power-up in the third. Essentially, by holding down the L3 button, sparks will point in the direction of the nearest gem, giving some indication of where the player is to look. I have mixed feelings about this ability. I hardly ever use it myself, but it did come up a few times in this playthrough. When you're missing just a few gems and you've already hit every area, it's a tempting tool to hone in on them, and I'm often not good at resisting those temptations. The tool is practical in those cases, and I imagine that's how many players choose to use it, especially adult players. However, what gives me pause for thought is that it does sort of take away from the challenge of exploring the worlds. It's like a get-out-of-jail-free card to a degree. However, I'm ultimately okay with its inclusion upon reflecting on what Ted Price said in that interview I mentioned earlier. The focus here went from collecting to completion, and with that focus in mind, it makes sense that Sparks is available as a tool working towards that goal. If the developers wanted players to go for full completion, giving them an extra hammer or screwdriver in the toolbox helps to achieve that. And if anyone wants to play as a purist, they can avoid using Sparks for this purpose. Therefore, the usefulness and optional nature of it are benefits that help deliver the intended experience for the player. It's hard not to approve of that. Alright, onward to Breeze Harbor. Wait, huh? Did you guys hear that? Did you hear something? I swear I heard something.
Trouble with the trolley, eh?
Oh my god, yes Fisher, I did have a bit of trouble with the trolley. Turns out this trolley is still hard to control, even in a remake, and even as an adult. The lava lizards of Skelos Badlands are often seen as the hardest challenge, but I think many of us would argue that it's this. I know I would. Well, either this or that vague puzzle in Mystic Marsh. The trolley is all trial and error based, not that hard if you think ahead and plan accordingly, but it always takes me a few rounds to memorize the course again, leading to many failures. Despite the frustration it can generate, it always feels like it's my fault when I mess it up, and the fairness of that makes me not judge it too harshly. I just wish Fisher didn't have to be so snarky about it. He might be the biggest troll in the entire series. That aside, I will say that Toys for Bob made this level way too dark. Advancing through the sections of this level requires Spyro to turn on the machines by flaming the piles of wood underneath to fire them up. The heaps were easy to spot in the original game, but the lighting is too dim here, making it hard to see. If you're unclear on what you need to do, hiding these away in the shadows is not going to help. It's a shame too, because it's one of the more interesting ways that new parts of a level unlock across the many stages. Traversing through Breeze Harbor takes a bit more thought than your standard level, and I do appreciate it for that. It's also another one of the sister levels I mentioned earlier, and contains the most pronounced and highlighted relationship. There's subtle similarities that tie other levels together, but this is the one where the relationship is made extremely clear. They are at war with Zephyr. You can see how the enemies you fight here are the same ones you help in Zephyr, and the vice versa is also true, although they do look a little bit different. It's a cool bit of world building that sees you playing both sides of the field while giving each world a little more weight and mood. It's great stuff. Since war is the theme here, I figured now would be a good time to talk about the redesign of enemies here in the Reignited version of Ripto's Rage. To be honest, my thoughts are very similar to the non-hostile NPCs that I talked about earlier. It's another mixed bag featuring some good adaptations, but other examples where they failed to modernize the originals without losing the charm. I think they nailed the trees and shrubs of Fracture Hills, as well as the tikis in Idle Springs, but the spiders of Crystal Glacier, the brown lizards in Glimmer, the bigger humanoids of Hurricos, and these mines we find here in Breeze Harbor never strike me as good looking. I could give other examples, but overall, I think there were more downgrades than upgrades, which sucks. Now, I do sympathize with Toys for Bob because many of the polygonal shaped enemies of the original had to be reworked, and that can be the hardest part of remaking any game, especially an older one, since the visual gap between the original and the new is always going to be so large. It feels like a case where more technology actually hurts the design, forcing their hand to smooth out the rough edges, kind of filling in the gaps along the way. But the problem is, those edges and gaps had a lot of charm, and it's charm that's been lost. Breeze Harbor's level design is pretty compact, not a lot of layers to it, but the same can't be said about Zephyr. Most of the critical path is found on the upper layers of the level, while the orb challenges are housed down below. The end of this stage is also a nod to Nork Cove, with these birds rolling TNT barrels at you, forcing you to jump over them to reach the enemy safely. Zephyr also does an outstanding job of upping the challenge once more, which makes sense given it's a level you have to buy your way into. I think a big reason for the increased challenge here is how enemies launch projectiles at you. This isn't brand new, but what makes it tough here is that they will do so even when you aren't looking, meaning you can be taken by surprise. You could argue that this is unfair to the player, but I don't feel that way owed to the number of fodder creatures wandering around for you to replenish your health with. And overall, I think the war theme comes through best in this world. It feels closer to an active military zone than anything we see with the Breeze builders. It's weird then that the orb challenges are tropes of nursery rhymes and famous plays, Little Bo Peep and Romeo and Juliet to be precise. As a collection, these may be the most thought-provoking orbs to gather within Spyro 2, as they both incorporate puzzle elements while testing your understanding and control of the mechanics. Romeo and Juliet's 2 orbs are gathered by seed puzzles that take advantage of the spit mechanic. Spyro must place seeds on predestined dirt patches to grow plants that he can stand on. These patches of dirt aren't as clear in the Reignited trilogy, but it isn't hard to infer what needs to be done. The puzzle comes from the need to manipulate the location of seeds, as your limitations such as the glide distance and your ability to only carry one seed at a time will hamper your progress. You have to come up with clever workarounds such as seeking out hidden seeds, as well as launching a seed up to the final platform before activating the seed to reach said platform. It's a bit of a trick as you figure out how to get the final seed to the destination it needs to reach. It makes you think, and that's really appreciated. Meanwhile, the Cowlek Orb Challenge sees Spyro channeling his herding skills. He needs to get these elephant cow creatures back into their pen using his flame and charge moves to manipulate their position. I found that this challenge is slightly easier in Reignited, as the Cowleks seem to always land where you want them to, whereas in the original, they were a tad more unruly. I also appreciate that the power-up gate here gives you Super Flame, which is used to launch these 2 Cowleks to insane heights. The whole challenge tests your spatial awareness, and it's a lot of fun. So overall, Zephyr is the most demanding level we've encountered so far. Its level design has more tucked away areas than any other, the enemies come at you in tougher ways, and the orb challenges make you use your brain. It's a great and lengthy stage. Okay, we've tackled about half of the levels in the game so far, and before going further, I wanted to talk more about the redesigns of the main NPCs. You know, Allura, Hunter, the Professor, Ripto, Moneybags, Gulp, and Crush. Keep in mind, the focus here is just on their physical appearances, not their personalities. To be fair, I think they did well in adapting most of them, really everyone except Hunter and Ripto. The best in my mind are Crush, Gulp, and Moneybags, which all feel pretty one-to-one with the originals. Some of their perceived characteristics have been lost, such as the intimidation of the monsters or the age of Moneybags, but overall, they're good. Allura and the Professor are fine. I don't feel they quite capture the original, but are still not bad. And maybe I'm just being too harsh on Allura, simply because, even without having to check, I'm certain that this model has provided too much Rule 34 ammunition. I don't like what they did with Hunter's personality in this remake, but in fairness, they didn't have much to work with when it came to his redesign. I still don't like it, I'm not the biggest fan of it, but it's okay, I guess. And Ripto, well, I flat out don't like it. I understand he was always supposed to be a little punk with a short fuse, and he still is that, but to me he's too much of it. The original Ripto's design had a touch of intimidation to him, but it's been lost here. They emphasized the horn too much as well, it just throws off the balance of the character. But I think my biggest problem with all of the new designs is the inclusion of teeth. They just trigger an uncanny valley response in me that is really hard to shake. I don't think any of them recapture the magic of the originals, at least in a 100% 1-to-1 ratio, but some of them do come close, some of them don't, and some of them are somewhere in the middle. It's once again a mixed bag. Next up, we have another race, this time at Metro Speedway. The flight course here is a bit more frantic than the first, as it doesn't guide you to the intended path quite as smoothly. In fact, I improvised but still had enough time to complete the challenge despite not taking the optimal route. So I would say it's a step up in challenge from Ocean Speedway. There's also another orb challenge here, and it's presented by the mayor, and may I say, I love these one-off character models that we find in the speedways. It suggests that there's more to these stages than we're permitted to see. Of course, this is probably just a reskin of the broken down safari guide in Mystic Marsh, so maybe he's not that one-off, but it feels that way. The associated test that the mayor provides is more trial and error, sort of like the previous Speedway Orb Challenge. Here, you have to follow Hunter as he shoots burglars, catching the loot they drop before it hits the ground or the water. There's a few sharp turns and moments where you have to adapt quickly or else you'll lose. The final loot is the most deceiving though, as if you fly over the bridge instead of under it, you won't make it in time. It's not too crazy, but it may end up taking you a few attempts to get it down. With that one out of the way, we press into the castle proper to complete the levels housed within. The first of those is Scorch, a desert theme level that's a sister stage with Shady Oasis. Unlike Zephyr, it's a little more compact, making you do a big loop to reach the end. The dense nature highlights one of Spyro's greatest gameplay elements, the quick hits of activity that you get as you barrel through a stage. It's that second-to-second gameplay loop that is just so delightful. You know what I mean? Like, whenever you're moving through the critical path of a stage, you'll often see a few enemies that you take out in quick succession, alternating between your flame and charge moves, but then, out of nowhere, a series of shiny gems catches your eye. Some are up high, some are down low, and without thinking, you instinctively move towards them, picking a path and quickly clearing it out, whether it's grabbing up scattered gems or ones housed in different containers that may require a different mode of attack to open up. In short, you're alternating between enemies and gem collection in a really short time period, and it just keeps you engaged. This enjoyable cycle is at the core of Spyro 2's Talisman challenges. The orbs get you focused on a single task or a minigame, while simply advancing through the level gives you many quick moments of interaction in a short time span, and it's just so satisfying. The orb challenges of Scorch are a bit weird. The one where Hunter has to catch monkeys without getting hit may take you a few tries until you realize you must distract them so that the coconuts get thrown at you instead of Hunter. The other challenge is twofold. You're tasked with recovering the flags from, well, a genie, I guess? To do so, you have to utilize the super flame to shoot him down, completing this before your allotted time expires. Then you follow him back to Handle while he chucks energy balls at you, and if you get hit, you start over. I find it to be a unique use of the super flame ability, because unlike in other stages, you actually have to aim with the lock on if you want to hit your target. So all in all, Scorch is a good level. Not the most memorable to me, but it's good. However, it provides examples of how Toys for Bob censored this experience when compared to the original. Here in Scorch, Bob the Flag Keeper was originally called Bombo and looked more like a baby instead of this more monstrous design. He's been renamed to Bob here, and I'm not entirely sure why. From what I can tell, Bombo isn't an offensive word, nickname, or slur. Maybe having the word bomb in the name was simply too much, or maybe they felt the character was too stereotypical of a design, which I guess maybe a little, but it never really rubbed me the wrong way since it seemed more like some goofy man-baby thing. I think for many fans of the original, it's a weird change. I don't think renaming him Bob takes away from the experience at all, but it generates a curiosity in returning players. Why make this tweak? Of course, it's not the only change they made. The dude in Colossus no longer asks you to kill the Yeti, but instead to torch him. Another example is how Moneybags no longer mentions the flirtatious fawns, or how Ripto's death isn't shown for nearly as long. Oh, and how the NPCs in Zephyr's Romeo and Juliet mission have been changed drastically. Again, these are minuscule changes that doesn't amount to much individually, but they do rob the game's overall tone. It doesn't necessarily anger me like it might others, but it just leaves me puzzled. Well, some research indicates that it was how the game was viewed by the rating members of the ESRB. Apparently, to secure an E10 plus rating for the Reignited trilogy, instead of a T rating, many things required alteration. This included some of the guns, like the ones found in Twilight Harbor, as well as some of the designs and dialogue. Activision wanted this game to have that E10 plus rating, and so they pressured Toys for Bob to adapt the recommended changes from the ESRB. As a result, a lot of the edginess of the original has been lost in the Reignited trilogy, whether it's the examples I mentioned, or even how certain cutscenes have been toned down, removing shades of violence and instead implying it. It's a large reason for why the Reignited trilogy fails to capture the spirit and feel of the original games. At least the first two, and maybe the third. The jury's still out on that one, but I'll talk about it when I cover that game. But for now, the ambience of Spyro 1 and the edginess of Spyro 2 have been forfeited to achieve the E rating, and I think that was a mistake. In my opinion, they should have been okay with the T rating, but when has accurate preservation ever been allowed to persist at the cost of profit? It's a bummer, but if you want to learn more about this censorship, I recommend checking out Canadian Guy A's video about it on YouTube. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. But for now, let's move on. A few years ago, I made a skit dunking on Fracture Hills, making fun of it and calling it my most hated level in the Spyro franchise. I was hoping to provide some laughs, and it's still a funny video to me at times, but let me be clear that I don't really despise this level. If anything, it's one of the rare cases where it's better in the Reignited trilogy, except for one major flaw. Like I mentioned earlier, I think the shrub and tree enemies are some of the most creative in the game, and they've been preserved well. You find yourself flaming every plant just to make sure that it isn't hostile, and that little mind trick that they play always stood out to me. Also, I think the music played by the satyrs after you free them genuinely sounds less grating here in the remake, which is a good thing. That ear-splitting tune of the original is what made this level fall down on my personal rankings. And the orb challenges here are just that, challenging. The power-up gate provides a supercharge, and you must use it to free a trapped fawn. To do this, you must maintain a supercharge running around the entire map, watching out for obstacles such as lava, jumps, and Earthshapers. The Earthshapers in particular can derail progress given that they are invincible to your two standard attacks. The only way of disposing of them is to charge them repeatedly until they fall into the lava below, where they do this cute little wave goodbye animation. I love it. Anyway, the challenge is a bit tedious compared to some of the others, but it's very satisfying when you pull it off, especially when you use it to open up this metal chest hidden in a small room. It requires you to pull off some tricky maneuvering to nab, and when you manage to do so, it's exhilarating. As I said though, Fracture Hills does contain a pretty obvious flaw, even here in the remake when there was a clear opportunity to fix it. The other two orbs require the help of the Alchemist and Hunter. The first part is freeing Hunter by guiding the Alchemist to him, bashing any Earthshapers who try to stop him. Much like the monkeys in Scorch, this can be a bit trial and error, as learning the alchemist path usually contains moments of failure, especially the juke he does right at the end, which is a particularly cruel trick when you're so close to being done. Still, it's certainly doable, and that's not really the issue. The problem comes after you free Hunter and he informs you that you'll need the head bash to complete this orb challenge. That doesn't immediately strike you as a huge issue, as you can just come back later after you've gotten that move. However, to do Hunter's second part, you must first repeat the Alchemist challenge, which again is frustrating at times. It's a clear example of Spyro 2 handling backtracking in an unfriendly way, forcing the player to redo content that they've already completed. Of course, backtracking in Spyro 2 is part of the completionist experience. Glimmer, Summer Forest, Sunny Beach, Fracture Hills, and Shady Oasis all cannot be completed on your first visit without glitches. That's because Spyro 2 has light Metroidvania-like elements to it, coming in the form of the 3 new abilities: swimming, climbing, and the head bash. Some challenges and areas are walled off from you until you return with the necessary ability. This isn't a huge problem on its own, especially in Summer Forest and Glimmer, where returning doesn't mandate that you repeat content, but instead offers up new areas or orb challenges. Shady Oasis is a little rougher, as you have to redo the Talisman challenge, guiding the hippo along the way, but it's really no different than doing a casual run for fun. So overall, the backtracking isn't bad, but it feels worse in Fracture Hills because it's asking you to repeat a challenge you've already proven you can do. Again, it's not a big deal, it's not going to make people hate the game, but it will stick out as a nuisance. Of everything in Spyro 2, this felt like the one instance where Toys for Bob could have changed something and it would have been a slam dunk for the entire fanbase. If players could start Hunter's challenge immediately, instead of redoing the Alchemist section, a lot of people would have applauded the change, correcting what was likely an Overlook problem from Insomniac's original. But no, they chose not to. Perhaps even worse is that they took out the cheat code that allowed players to unlock all the abilities from the very start, meaning that a completionist file will require backtracking. It's a good thing then that Spyro 2 is so enjoyable, and that much of its backtracking leads to new content instead of forcing you to grapple with things you've already done. It's just a shame they couldn't align Fracture Hills with this philosophy. At least when you return, you get to smash up the Earthshapers that may have caused you a bit of grief. As we enter Magma Cone, we're shown a cutscene of a few fawns relaxing. One notices some rumblings from the nearby volcano, and as it opens, it shoots out a magma rock, smashing his buddy, but leaving him unscathed. Cutscenes like this aren't unique to this stage, as every level features an introductory and conclusion video after entering and departing respectively. These cutscenes give the player some insight into the problem the world is facing, that's elaborated on further by the first NPC they encounter. In this case, Looney here tells us that the Earthshapers have disrupted the volcano, causing it to erupt. Then, after we help them defeat the stone monsters and put the lid back on the volcano, we see a scene of the fawns partying together while one is accidentally knocked into the lava. The cute character design presents these moments as a gag, nothing ultra-violent or anything like that. It's meant to be endearing and charming, and it succeeds in adding more of those desirable elements into Ripto's rage. So overall, these cutscenes add a lot, and they're just a really nice touch. Now, I wouldn't really have expected to see cutscenes like this in the uninhabited worlds of Spyro 1, but I don't see why they weren't carried onward to Spyro 3 by Insomniac. The structure of that game is very similar to this one, and could have benefited from their inclusion, but you just won't find them. It's an opportunity, and I wouldn't have minded it if Toys for Bob took advantage of that and created some of their own in Year of the Dragon, to see if they could capture the spirit of Insomniac's originals found here. Alas, no attempt was made. At least what we got here helps enhance the presentation of Avalar. Oh, and the fawns helping you destroy the Earth Shapers here is also really adorable. It's a great little touch to the level. Magma Cone itself is akin to Aquaria Towers in that it's meant to be a level designed around one of the new abilities, in this case, climbing. There's an initial scalable wall at the level's beginning, and then 2 larger cones that can be climbed as you progress. The first one is smaller, but houses Hunter's orb challenges, where you must catch more crystals than he does. It's a frantic minigame as you dart and zoom around quickly, switching the camera's view on a dime to try to hone in on where the next crystal will spawn. And it's just really satisfying to rip one away from Hunter at the last second, and equally heartbreaking to hard charge for one just to see it slip back into the crack. After paying greedy pants here, we head into the volcano proper, which is more secluded and congested than the rest of the level. It's here where we do the most amount of climbing as we scale the volcano to close the lid on the top, which is a detail I've always found to be humorous. Really though, it's nothing too crazy, but it's good to see the climbing mechanic get a detailed level of its own to shine in. Just including it sporadically to create backtracking would have been a nuisance. With this level though, it feels like a purposeful inclusion instead of a restriction. You'll also find one more orb challenge here, but it's not as dynamic and emotionally enthralling as the one with Hunter. You're tasked with destroying all the hat thieves by combining the flight power-up gate with the spit mechanic. It shoehorns you into using the lava balls, which doesn't feel quite right here, since Spyro's flame ought to be more than enough to take them out, but no, you're forced to use the balls. If this were any other enemy, the flame would suffice, but if you get too close here, they just repel you with their noisemakers. It's sort of a forgettable challenge if you ask me. Speaking of which, Magma Cone is probably the level I forget about the most, despite the fact that it was featured as a demo hidden in the original Crash Team Racing alongside of Colossus. When I was a kid with a PlayStation 1, I played that demo a lot, but upon getting the full game, Magma Cone never really stood out to me. It's primarily because by the time one reaches this level, as well as Shady Oasis, they've most likely completed 6 other worlds in Autumn Plains, 7 if you include Metro Speedway. Autumn Plains houses the most stages by far, but it makes me wonder if fatigue of this homeworld contributes to the last 2 levels feeling more forgotten. Not that I ever get tired of Autumn Plains, it's just that we've been here for a while and it feels like it should be concluding by the time we reach Magma Cone. And I'd love to hear what your favorite and least favorite levels in Ripto's Rage are down in the comments below. To access Shady Oasis, we'll first have to give Moneybags our ceremonial small fee. We've encountered the bear enough times to talk about his role in the game. Story-wise, his position in Avalar is unclear to me. He always seems to get the boot out of the castles, but I can't imagine that he's the king. In gameplay though, he acts as a progress check to ensure the player is continuing to grab gems as much as they do talismans and orbs. His tolls usually aren't significant enough to stop progress, save for that one time back in Summer Forest. It's more of a nudge to remind the player that gems count towards full completion, and as we know, that was one of their guiding design principles for Ripto's Rage. He also gives the player an antagonistic NPC to play off so that Ripto's appearances can be saved exclusively for boss encounters. You don't view Moneybags as a villain, but you come to view him as the selfish and smug con artist that he is. Ironically, if you've been getting all the orbs you can up until this point, you can reach the threshold to fight Ripto before even entering Winter Tundra, by getting the only available one in Shady Oasis. I always found that to be crazy because you can just skip all the levels in Winter Tundra and go right till the final boss. That's wild. Anyway, of all the levels in Spyro 2, I'd say Shady Oasis is the most improved by the graphical updates, at least in my opinion. Its structure features one core location with a loop going around it that the player must follow to unlock the talisman. The mode of progression this time is feeding the hippos so that they're large enough to smash through the steel gates. It's amazing how many levels in Ripto's Rage are structured this way. small linear areas or rooms that must be entered through some sort of gimmick, like destroying the Earthshapers in Magma Cone, hitting the buttons in Aquaria Towers, or using the NPCs to your advantage in Crystal Glacier. They never ran out of creative ways to repeat this central idea, and it once again plays out in Shady Oasis with the apple-eating hippos. It's here where we also encounter a question mark face for the third time. There was one in Skelos Badlands and Zephyr, and now we find another. Doing away with keys, Ripto's Rage instead introduced new gem container types. Returning are the basic chests, this time shaped as baskets that can be either flamed or charged, as well as metal containers that must be charged to open. The iron chests that used to require a key now can only be opened by using a power-up ability like Supercharge or Super Flame. Nothing crazy, but occasionally they test you, while also giving the power-up gate something new to do. And finally, we have 5 new container types. The underwater one, the exploding bottle that must be lit on fire to open safely, the head bash crate that, well, requires the head bash to open, containers attached to balloons, and these question mark vases. Out of all the container types, these are easily the least satisfying. The joy of smashing up containers and getting shiny gems is universal. Every player who enjoys the game loves that visual and audio feedback every single time they break a container. The head bash case and iron crates test your progress and skill and are satisfying once you have the means to open them. But the question mark vases don't provide that same positive feedback because they are the only container that you don't immediately receive gems from after hitting them successfully once. Instead, you parade around the map looking for their new spawn point, doing this 4 or 5 times until eventually it opens for good. I think the idea is that they're supposed to be hidden and you're meant to use the screenshot to ascertain their location. The problem is that they aren't hidden well enough to make it feel like a puzzle, so they end up being just a backtracking requirement, and that's not ideal, and that's why I don't like them. Without the head bash, we're only free to complete one orb challenge here in Shady Oasis, but it is a fun callback to Spyro 1. We have to chase down thieves. This time they've stolen the hippo's lamps and we gotta retrieve them. Nothing overly difficult for a Spyro the Dragon veteran. I did learn something new though on this playthrough. You can use the lava rock that spawns from the goo to dispatch the thieves without having to chase them down. I wanted to share that because I thought it was a cool touch, it's something I didn't know, and it was a nice moment of player experimentation being rewarded. Icy Speedway is another level that requires you to pay money bags to enter, but once you're there, the flight challenge is not that tough. In hindsight, I struggled more with the ones found in Spyro the Dragon. It felt like I had to be more precise with the controls to achieve a solid run when playing that game. That's not the case here though, at least through 3 speedways. The toughest part about Icy Speedway is once again finding the intended path, but even without it, you can finish the challenge with more than enough time left. The real secret here is uncovering the Hidden Orb challenge, and for once, that word hidden is 100% accurate. Hunter is camped out in an igloo close to the start of the race. You must fly through 50 rings without missing a single one, and it's bound to take a few tries given the controls are a bit finicky. If you react too fast or too slow, you'll screw up and miss a ring, which sees a total start over. It's about the same difficulty as the loot catching back in the previous speedway, but it's just extended here. You have to play perfectly for longer. Sadly, our time in Autumn Plains is coming to an end, as we come face to face with Ripto's remaining minion, Gulp. Gulp's fight is a lot more challenging than Crush's, especially here in the Reignited trilogy, where it's even harder. The encounter is tough for 3 main reasons. The first is that you can't damage Gulp in conventional ways. You can only do so by using the items that spawn in from the pterodactyl eggs. This includes a barrel you can bash into him, a bomb you can detonate near him, and a rocket that can be launched at him. The rocket is easy to use, The barrel is a little tougher, requiring you to line up the shot and hope he doesn't move. But by far, the most annoying is the bomb. It's a pain when a couple of these spawn in a row because once you light them, they don't always land right near Gulp, and even if they do, the delayed fuse gives him time to escape, which is a pain. The second reason it's tough is that Gulp can heal. Some of the eggs contain fodder that you can use to recover health, but if Gulp gets there first, he gets a tick of health back instead. But by far, the biggest reason for Gulp's increased challenge is simply how aggressive he is. His charge and slam can catch you off guard if you don't sprint away in a hurry, but his electric balls are the worst part. You can't simply charge away from them because they read not where Spyro currently is, but instead an estimation of where he will be if the player doesn't switch their path. If you don't course correct, you end up taking a hit. This isn't bad at first when he only shoots 2 shots at a time, but eventually that number grows to 4 and 6, making it very easy to trap yourself even if you continue to change directions with each shot. As a result of these factors, I died to Gulp once before defeating him on the second go, which was still a tough match. It's a solid increase in challenge from anything combat related that we've seen yet. After the defeat of Gulp, Ripto seemingly perishes by falling off a cliff. Allura thanks Spyro and mentions that the denizens of Avalar have come together through the Ripto ordeal thanks to Spyro's help. They've even brought him a beach chair and an umbrella for his trip to Dragon Shores. But meanwhile in Winter Tundra, the professor seeks to reopen the portal to the Dragon Worlds so that Spyro can go home. A still alive Ripto intercepts him. He steals the power gem, and after a completely butchered moment, more on that later, Ripto takes over all of Winter Tundra, so it turns out that Spyro's vacation will just have to wait a little bit longer. Arriving in Winter Tundra provides another nostalgic blast. Between the music and the nighttime scenery, it just works so well. It gives Christmas vibes without the iconography, and I love it. A true encapsulation of the wintry feel. It's here where you get a real sense that your adventure is starting to wind down, and it's pretty bittersweet. The land is much more condensed than Summer Forest and Autumn Plains, but it houses a great secret of its own. The orb atop the waterfall in the cavern is another one I never found as a kid, and the solution is so obvious if you just think about it. Track the source of the water back to where it started, and voila, a hidden underwater tunnel for you to swim through. The setup is very reminiscent of the one earlier in Summer Forest, and it's hidden a little bit more here, which is perfect because this is the last homeworld. And this orb always reminds me of the one hidden behind the breakable wall in Autumn Plains. The final orb here is hidden underneath the giant rock, which you can break open after acquiring the head bash move from Moneybags for 1,000 gems. A tall tax, no doubt. And now that we have it, it's hard not to feel like the head bash move got the cold shoulder, not receiving a level where it's heavily featured like the other 2 abilities. This fact, paired with other notable exclusions like finding more stages in Winter Tundra or a spring-themed homeworld, may lead you to wonder if Spyro 2 was rushed. I couldn't find any official word on the matter, but it's not hard to see how that may be the case. It released in the following calendar year from Spyro 1 and was running on a modified engine compared to the original game. That's not a lot of time to build a game on a brand new engine, especially when expanding the scope as much as Ripto's Rage does. Fortunately though, Spyro 2 doesn't feel like an incomplete game. There's plenty of content for a PlayStation 1 game, and it feels chock full of new ideas that are used in interesting ways. There's just a few oddities here in the last hub world that may provoke the rush sensation within you. Another detail that I like is that 2 of the 4 portals in Winter Tundra open after Spyro has collected a certain number of orbs, 15 for Cloud Temples and 25 for Metropolis. It's good to shift the focus back to the orbs at this point, since the Ripto fight will require many of them. I remember playing this game as a kid and being thrilled to finally get enough orbs to open Metropolis, but soon realizing I had a long grind to face the final boss. That sucked when I was 8 years old, and I'm kinda surprised they didn't lower the requirements here in the Reignited trilogy to align more with its obvious slant towards appealing to today's kids, not the kids that grew up with Spyro. Mystic Marsh makes it clear that we've entered a whole new level of challenge. There's a ton of enemies, the level design is really layered, and the orb challenges here kick it up a notch. Of course, the Marsh itself does not feel right in the Reignited trilogy. It's probably the level that suffered the most because it's missing that hazy, washed out look that the original had. It's another case where the extra detail subtracted atmosphere instead of adding more in. Luckily, the level design remains excellent. Mystic Marsh is broken up into 3 areas. You have the ground floor where the river flows by, you have the tree huts up above, and then you have this maze-like section where connecting water tunnels and caves are the only way to get from place to place. It's really unlike anything else in the game, making it really stand out. Mystic Marsh also pivots away from talismans, as you won't earn any of those in Winter Tundra. It always struck me as odd that they gave you orbs instead of talismans, but it's probably just a gameplay necessity overriding the world's continuity. It would make sense if every world of Avalar had its own talisman, a representation of their land, like a flag of sorts. That was always the idea I got, so it makes it weird to enter worlds where they simply don't have them. However, with Ripto's boss door requiring orbs instead of talismans, the shift makes sense. Players are going to need orbs to wrap up the adventure, so why not give them a few simply for completing the last few levels? It's a way of helping out struggling players by offering up some cheap alternatives. Now, you could argue that talismans should have been continued and to have made Ripto's boss door respond to those instead of orbs. That would keep the continuity of the adventure, but it works against Insomniac's goal of pushing for completion instead of collection. It's hard not to get the sense that the developers were proud of the work they did with this game, and wanted players to see it all. If talismans were the only progression check, players could sprint through the levels and miss out on a lot of great missions and challenges. So while it is a bit strange, I can't help but to ultimately agree with their decision to pivot away from talismans in favor of orbs. Speaking of orbs, the challenges here are tough. Chasing down the kangaroos always takes me a couple of tries. They feel more slippery than the thieves of Shady Oasis, and they don't have the spittable rock to use against them. It takes good old-fashioned platforming skill across narrow walkways and around tight corners, and it's always satisfying when you track them down. And the Professor's test is really unlike anything else in the entire game. He's lost his pencil, and through a series of trades, you have to recover it. This is the most hands-off approach to an orb challenge in the entire game, as you must think for yourself and fully explore the level to find where trades can be made. For example, he first offers you an egg, and with a little brain power, you can deduce it goes in this nest. From there, you get a plant seed, and there happens to be an empty pot nearby. These simple deductions aren't hard to make if you have the patience to study the item you're given and the layout of the world. And if it's too hard, you can always look up a guide online. I used to do that in the past, but on this run, I decided not to, and despite not having played this game in 7 years, I figured it all out on my own. And you know what? I was a little proud of that. Of all the levels in Winter Tundra, I think Cloud Temples is the one I find most forgettable. It always felt like a prototype stage for Spyro 3, feeling out of place, and I'm not entirely sure why. The most obvious thing to point at for this feeling would be the power-up gate here that gives you the Super Freeze ability, changing Spyro's Fire Breath to an Ice Breath. This is a concept that would get its own level in Year of the Dragon with frozen altars, and would become a dedicated move in Enter the Dragonfly. But we do not talk about Enter the Dragonfly. Here in Cloud Temples, the ability isn't much more than a party trick, used to freeze some enemies in place so that they can be used as platforms as you ascend the bell towers. I would have liked to see this idea taken further, but I can't complain too much. The other orb challenge is a lot more straightforward as you follow behind Agent Zero as he makes his way to his super secret base. I gotta say, as a young kid, this challenge was always tough, as I struggled to get behind cover fast enough to avoid his gaze. It's a breeze here in the remake, which has me kinda questioning if things are actually easier, or maybe I'm just more skilled now that I'm an adult. Anyway, I don't have much more to talk about here in Cloud Temples, as it's a relatively straightforward stage. So I'll take this opportunity to pivot back on what's changed for the worse here in the remake. And that brings us to the audio, specifically the sound and voice work, since I always keep the music on the original setting instead of the reignited tracks. To be clear, I think the altered sound effects and voices remove more charm than the redesigns I talked about earlier. To Toys for Bob's credit, when it comes to basic sounds, there's a lot less overall complaints, as I think the sound effects are close enough to the original, like the sounds of containers being broken, Spyro's flame breath, the bonk from running into walls, and more. All of them sound like the original, or may even be slightly improved in some rare cases. Still, the sound effects that I do miss really drag things down. A great example of this would be the zapping sound that fairies made when you whiz past them in the original game. This made Zoe and the other fairies stand out a lot more, giving them a more grounded feel in the world, but in Reignited, I always forget they exist unless they specifically stop me to explain something. And another thing I really miss is the heaviness of the jump sound effect from the original game. That one I notice all the time because Spyro jumps a lot in this title. By far though, the voice work is a significant step backwards compared to the original games. On the whole, it seems like many NPCs lack proper voice direction to reflect the moods and tones of the original work. Occasionally they nail it, such as in Fracture Hills, Shady Oasis, Glimmer, and Scorch amongst others, but there's also plenty of examples where it's off, as if they didn't even figure out the intention of the original work. The chanting of the Colossus NPCs has been completely butchered, as I've already been over. It's a total failure, but that's just the most egregious example. Prince Tortoise of Sunny Beach used to sound a bit senile, but now he's clear as day, losing out on a character trait in the process. The Electrolls of Hurricos were a bit nasally, reinforcing their nerdy nature, but that's also been done away with. The cavemen of Skelos Badlands and Crystal Glacier don't lean into the Oonga Boonga dialect nearly as much. And there's more examples of this, but it just leaves over half of the world's characters feeling like they've lost their personality. Those tiny details in the voice work were a big part of the world's charm, and without it, you definitely notice a difference. Too many characters end up feeling bland, generic, and stale. This also extends to our main cast, but we'll touch on them more later. Overall, I think the team did a good job of retaining the atmosphere of some of the levels, but a lot of charm provided by character designs and the way they spoke has been completely forfeited in this remake. Of course, one level that maintains its charm pretty well is Robotica Farms. There's something so novel and pleasant about a farm being ran by robots who take all the southern drawl and redneck nature of the farmer stereotype. Everything here reminds you of things you'd see at a farm, but it's all been made metallic, from the workers to the bug pests and to the crops themselves. Toys for Bob thankfully was able to retain that feel in the remake. It's also just a fun and challenging level. The missile launching bees are tough to get around, the robot farmers are delightful, and the orb challenges test you without pushing you into frustration. One sees you completing another supercharged maze, the smashing of the pumpkins can temporarily block your view, but quick reaction time can overcome this. And flaming the bugs in quick succession isn't bad once you deduce what angle you should be attacking them from. The challenge is not killing them, it's figuring out your approach. So, you know how earlier I discussed the head bash and how it didn't get a level of its own, unlike the other abilities? Well, Robotica Farms is the closest we get to that. Metropolis does utilize it a little bit as well, but I think this level here is the closest we get. And that's owed to the enemies that can only be destroyed by knocking them onto their backs and then head bashing them from above. That's it, that's the only thing requiring the head bash here, but you do use it more here than you do in Metropolis. And honestly, I can't help but to feel it could have been taken a lot further. Imagine for a second if the goal of this level wasn't just reaching the end where the lamp is turned on automatically, but instead a series of lamps that you had to activate along the critical path using the head bash. They could have an adjacent button on the ground that Spyro could activate using his cranium. And these seesaws could have been given further utility if Spyro could only switch their angle by using the head bash as well. Throw in a few of those gem containers that can only be opened with the move, and then rework more of the enemies to match the metal beetles, and bam, you have a proper head bash level. These are just some simple spitball ideas, but incorporating them into Robotica Farms would have been a good way of making this final move feel on par with the climb and the swim. Hindsight aside, one reason that Ripto's Rage is my favorite Spyro game is that each level features unique enemies. Many enemy types only appear in one stage and do a great job of reflecting the geography of the world, such as the camels in Scorch, the minor lizards of Glimmer, or the elephant-snail hybrids of Mystic Marsh. Meanwhile, other enemies reflect more human conflict, such as the battle between the wizards in Cloud Temples, or the ongoing war between Breeze Harbor and Zephyr. All in all, the different enemy types keep the experience feeling fresh, like you're always coming up against something new, while still maintaining design tropes such as size and metal armor that inform the player on how to dispatch of such foes. It's another one of those small things that helps the game feel really special. Metropolis is sadly our final regular level in Ripto's Rage, but it's just as awesome as any other. After completing Robotica Farms, you might have wondered where all the animals went. Well, they're invading the city of course, which is another cool idea. What can I say, the pigs and cows are as tough as they are charming. Meanwhile, there's a few elevators here that require you to use the head bash, but again, it's nothing that constitutes a similar relationship to Aquaria Towers and the swim move, or Magma Cone and climbing. Here, it feels more like a cheap way to get some mileage out of it. The real highlight of Metropolis is the final area, a wide open play space where the inventor droid informs you of her latest creation, a double power-up gate that offers you flight and super flame in a 2-for-1 package. It's nothing too challenging, but it's a good opportunity to practice controlling Spyro while shooting flames, as the final boss will require you to do the same. Giving players a relatively safe space to come to grips with the controls was smart, especially doing so right before they become super relevant, as this is the final stage before Ripto. The area is really beautiful, and it's just fun to explore its many layers, a nice finale to levels structured this way. The other orb challenge here requires you to defeat an ox using bombs while you're skating. What a sentence that is. This minigame has always felt artificially difficult. The inclusion of the ice floor is given a weak setup point from this robot, but really it's here just to make the task harder. Spyro can't charge, jump, or change direction quickly while skating, meaning you're much more susceptible to getting hit with the bombs. Not to mention, launching those bowling balls with wicks back at the ox doesn't feel great, much like it was back in Gulp's boss fight. It's hard to get a real sense of how far the bomb will fly and what angle it will move at, making the whole thing sort of tedious and frustrating. I was lucky enough to get through it on my first go in this playthrough. But it got me thinking about the difficulty curve of Ripto's Rage, and honestly, I have a lot of respect for it, at least the original. Back in 1999, Spyro 2 did a good job of gradually escalating the challenge, whether it was enemy design or in their minigames. Glimmer set a great but simple baseline, allowing the player to experiment with the controls without much friction working against them. The first enemies you encountered wouldn't attack you, allowing you to learn how to charge and flame them out of existence. But the level did include a few hostile NPCs, that way danger could be established as a real thing. From there, enemies gradually took on more capabilities. The enemies of Idle Springs were violent, but some of them stand their ground and don't have ranged moves. Eventually though, enemies got those ranged moves, immediately signaling a boost in challenge, alongside of other advantages they received, like having high ground, a shield to hide behind, or invulnerability to everything except environmental damage. In other words, they had a lot of small ideas that they could employ throughout the levels to give enemies a fresh feeling while still advancing the difficulty. At the same time, levels got more winding with more hidden areas the further you progress, challenging the player to be more thorough in their exploration. But this difficulty is felt most in the orb challenges, which start off relatively easy but progress further and further the more you press onward. Unlike the enemies though, this difficulty isn't a nice upward slope. It definitely has a few spikes. Some challenges are naturally tougher than others, like the lizards in Skelos Badlands, the trolley in Breeze Harbor, or the ox here in Metropolis. However, the backtracking nature of the title sort of encourages you to revisit these tougher encounters as you get more skilled with the controls. Many orb challenges also follow an archetype such as a supercharge course or chasing down thieves, and all of these progress naturally, going from easier to more difficult. Overall, I think the difficulty was modulated very well in the original. However, it's a bit different in the Reignited trilogy. To be clear, these games are meant for kids, but Spyro isn't a new IP anymore. There's going to be a lot of adults who played these games as a kid and bought the Reignited trilogy to revisit them. In other words, there's going to be players of every age range, and so I sympathize with Toys for Bob when trying to tackle the subject of difficulty. That being said, I do think they went too far in making some of the challenges an absolute breeze. I'm talking about things like racing Hunter to capture crystals in Magma Cone, the Agent Zero mission in Cloud Temples, or the lizards in Skelos Badlands, amongst many others. And then meanwhile, Gulp's boss fight is harder than ever, showing that they didn't quite nail the balance going in both directions. Perhaps they were trying to make the game more approachable for children, but I'd argue the largest percentage of the player base is going to be adults returning to the game from their childhood. With this in mind, I think the difficulty of the original should have been maintained in full, not weakened. But unfortunately, I just don't think that's the case in the Reignited trilogy. Now again, it could be that I'm an adult now, and it's just naturally easier than it was as a kid, but I genuinely think they didn't quite nail the difficulty. We have one quick detour before Ripto, Canyon Speedway, our final flight level. To be honest, I don't really understand if I'm just approaching the pass in the wrong way or what, because despite this being the final rally, it seems easier than the last two. You'd think that these levels would progressively get more challenging, but that wasn't the case for me. The only trick here is that running against the driver's path doesn't save you time, it ends up making you lose instead. Besides that, it's a more straightforward route than both Metro and Icy Speedway, so I really don't get it. Heck, even the orb challenge here is pretty simple. Hunter flies a remote-controlled aircraft that you must shoot down balloons with. Again, the previous 3 orb challenges within flight levels were harder than this, so Canyon Speedway ends up feeling pretty bare bones. If you ask me to name every level in each Spyro game, I'm fairly confident that I could do it. Maybe not with Year of the Dragon, but the first 2 for sure. That is, until you brought up the flight levels. These do not stick out in my memory at all, especially this one. I don't really have much more to say about the flight challenges other than what I've already said. They are a quick and okay gimmick to break up the pace of normal levels, and not much more than that. I do them only because they are required for a 100% completion file, and if they weren't, I'd probably skip them. And with that, we reach our final boss, Ripto himself. This is a 3-stage fight that brilliantly uses the orbs as temporary power-ups. It contextualizes why you needed 40 orbs to fight Ripto, because they are the tools you use to take him down. It's a great way to tie it all together. When orbs drop, it's a race to get 3 of them before Ripto does. Supercharge, Super Flame, and a brand new ability which I always thought of as a poison bomb are your methods to dispatch of Ripto. In the first round, you go back and forth with the wannabe Emperor, zooming around the arena to collect orbs before he does. Once you have enough, you get a very short window to deal damage to him, but if he gets 3 orbs, he gets some supercharged powers of his own. It's pretty frantic, but being able to stun him temporarily with your charge and flame move really does help you control the pace of the fight. The second phase kicks things up by removing that tool because Ripto now has a mechanical version of Gulp to parade around on. The objective remains the same, get 3 orbs and deal damage before he does, but one beautiful element about this phase is being able to charge in and grab an orb away from him just seconds before he gets it himself. It's always a satisfying maneuver to pull off. Still, this phase is more difficult because Ripto's ranged attacks home into your expected position much like they did in the Gulp encounter. Once you account for that though, it's not hard to overcome. And finally, once you beat this phase, the floor breaks and crumbles into the lava, leading to an airborne fight. No need to gather orbs in this phase, as instead you get infinite flight and a super flame just like you did in Metropolis. Ripto's blasts can hone in on you, but they're easy enough to dodge. Well, so long as you don't get the glitch that I did where he turns invisible. I tried to give it a go, trying to shoot blindly to take him out. I managed to hit him once, but after that I gave up and reset the fight, which made this a pretty annoying bug. And then Ripto did manage to beat me fair and square once before I finished him off in our 3rd round. Overall, the fight feels simpler to me than Gulp's, it's just longer, but length is a good thing here though, as it gives more weight to this final bout in your fight to save Avalar. After defeating him, Ripto is shown plummeting into the lava, but they cut it pretty early. It's another example of censorship that I'm not a fan of. From here, Allura thanks you for all your help, the professor opens up a portal to Dragon Shores, and Hunter finally proves himself useful, beating up moneybags and giving you all your gems back. From here, Spyro is free to visit Dragon Shores, but he can't enter it without first collecting 55 orbs. What I want to say for now though is that the story here in Reignited is about the same as it was in the original, but some of the characters have certainly lost their charm, whether it's due to different designs or voice work. Starting off, it's cool that Greg Berger reprised his role as Ripto, but the voice is different and the design is drastically different, so he doesn't feel nearly as intimidating. Allura, Moneybags, and the Professor are fine, maybe a bit tonally different due to their different voices. Moneybags doesn't seem as uppity, Allura doesn't have that bossy side, and the Professor doesn't sound as nerdy, but they're all still acceptable. What isn't acceptable though is Hunter. My god, he was my favorite character in the original games, and they just absolutely butchered him here. Again, his original design didn't give them a lot to work with, but the teeth and claws just gave him too much detail, giving me an uncanny valley reaction. But worst of all is the portrayal of his personality. Hunter was always a moron in the original games, a lovable, wannabe do-gooder who wasn't particularly helpful or brave, but always charming to be around. His nature was captured so well by voice actor Greg Berger in 1999, but has been replaced here by Robbie Daymond. Nothing against Daymond, I just don't think the voice matches the spirit of the original. And the elephant in the room is that it's weird that Greg Berger was brought back to reprise his role as Ripto, but not as Hunter. I don't get that at all. I don't know if he couldn't do the voice anymore from growing older, I'm not sure if that's the reason, but the change signals a huge loss in personality. You may recall that I mentioned after the Gulp fight that they had ruined the moment involving Hunter and Ripto. In that original, Allura implies Hunter to do something after Ripto steals the power crystal and threatens them, and he just sits there and says, hey, give that back. It was hysterical to me. He tries to help without doing anything actually useful, as if his words alone will sway the villainous Ripto's mind. It was the defining moment of Hunter's personality, at least to me. Here in the remake though, he goes after Ripto, which totally impedes on his cowardice nature. There's just too many moments like this where they failed to capture the same vibe. His personality here feels like a big nothing, a total wash, and a complete loss of his character. The cowardly side, the jealousy of Spyro, and the lovable stupidity have all been forfeited here, and it's a big reason for why this remake fails to capture the spirit, the mood, and the vibe of the original story. You can take this bad feeling that Hunter gives and extrapolate it over many other examples across the remake. The original story was simple but great because it added so much to the experience because of the way it was presented, the way the characters acted, their personalities and mannerisms, and their voices. It just made the game so damn charming. Those details have been lost in translation, so now we get the same beats without nearly the same impact. We're nearing the end of our adventure now, but let's do one last wrap-up tour to finish completing all the levels that we couldn't before. This involves pit stops in Glimmer, Summer Forest, Sunny Beach, Fracture Hills, and Shady Oasis, so let's get to it. Getting back to these levels is super simple, owed to the new fast traveling you can do from the guidebook. You no longer have to use these portals to reach previous homeworlds, but I'm really glad they still included them. Anyway, Summer Forest sees us climbing up this ladder to access an orb and a few red gems that were previously locked behind the climb move. Glimmer is similar in that we use the climb to reach a simple flight challenge and a few more gems. Sunny Beach's climbing section brings us face to face with the Turtle Soup Chef, and let me just say two things. This challenge has been made easier here in Reignited, just like many others, and two, those turtles are way too eager to get in that pot. After nabbing up the rest of the gems, it's off to Fracture Hills. Here, we engage with the worst backtracking bit of the adventure, as I mentioned earlier. We have to redo the Alchemist section, which is a pain. I did lose once again, before we finally get to join Hunter in using the Head Bash to smash up the Earth Shapers. It's extremely easy, as is the challenge in Shady Oasis, where we use the same move to free a few trapped hippos. The Head Bash maneuver ends up being really weak when it comes to these orb challenges. There's just not a lot to do with the move. I can't see how you fail any of these challenges, making them more tasks than tests. But with that, we've now collected all 10,000 treasure, 14 talismans, and 64 orbs, giving us a 100% completed file in Ripto's Rage. But as any fan of Spyro will know, we're not done yet. So let's cross the last two things off of our list, completing Dragon Shores and nabbing all the skill points. If you're like me, you never managed to open the gate into Dragon Shores as a kid. I remember playing this game many times, but being too young to fully master the controls, meaning I missed a lot of orbs. On more than a few summer days and rainy nights, I stood outside this gate just using my Flame Breath and charge move on this Nork, hoping that he'd somehow open the door. It wasn't until I reached adulthood that I managed to get behind these gates and see what I had missed for all those years. And to be honest, it was pretty underwhelming. I'm sure years of built-up curiosity about this location made the reality seem lesser or uninteresting. I guess the version of Dragon Shores I had built up in my mind could never live up to what the reality was. But yeah, Dragon Shores is alright. It's an amusement park where Spyro can engage in 5 activities: the dunk tank, a shooting gallery, riding a roller coaster, taking a trip through the Tunnel of Love, and rewatching cutscenes in the movie theater after you've collected 10 tokens. Each of the first 4 activities give you tokens for completing them, but the challenges aren't anything extreme. The dunk tank, Tunnel of Love, and shooting gallery are very simple and exist mostly for entertainment. And riding the roller coaster is more challenging than those, but it's nothing crazy, basically a repeat of Trouble with the Trolley, but much easier. After all, this is meant to be a wind down after your work stopping Ripto. And finally, if you've collected every single gem and orb, this final door will unlock, and it houses a different type of power-up gate. It gives you Super Flame, but it keeps it permanent on this save file. It's a cool idea and a nice little reward in case you want to replay any levels and torch enemies from a distance like a sniper. I'm very thankful though that the team included a way to turn this feature off and then restore your original flame attack, and vice versa. To be honest, I just love Spyro's original flame breath and prefer it to the enhanced version. I just wish this method was found in the options, but instead it must be entered as a cheat code, meaning not everyone will know it exists, and that's a shame. And if you like having the power up, going back to Dragon Shores every time is kind of a pain, so a menu option would have been nice. Overall, Dragon Shores is a relaxing wind down and an opportunity to put a button on this adventure with Spyro. It doesn't quite live up to the hopes my childhood self had, but that's not really the game's fault or some major issue. They really didn't have to include it at all, so if anything, this is nice. I still think the other two bonus world levels in Spyro the Dragon and Year of the Dragon clear this, but I don't mind it in the slightest. Lastly, we have the skill points. These were first introduced in Ripto's Rage back in 1999 and continued into Year of the Dragon, but like many other features, have also been applied retroactively to Spyro the Dragon. Even more so than Dragon Shores, the inclusion of these feel like a little something extra that the developers wanted to put in the game, rewarding you for simply horsing around in the levels, seeing what you could get away with, and testing yourself to pull off some tough tasks successfully. Here in Ripto's Rage, many of them fall into categories like beating a speedway within a certain time limit, defeating each boss without taking damage, destroying all of a certain environmental detail like the windmills and Hurricos, or just random things like doing 3 laps around the supercharged ramp in Fracture Hills without messing up. I did all of these just for completionist's sake, but I did cheat a little. Using the Super Flame power-up makes many of them a breeze, particularly the speedways, since you can snipe targets from a distance, and against bosses, since it literally breaks them, dealing damage in quick succession. All in all, the skill points are a cherry on top of this excellent package, adding about an hour of playtime after you've wrapped up everything else. And the new art gallery is a reasonable added bonus, giving you a tangible reward for getting the skill points. Oh, and one final note, I really appreciate that you can redo talisman and orb challenges. It lets you engage with your favorite levels without having to start a new save file and reach that part of the game, and I think that freedom is really awesome. Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage isn't just my favorite Spyro game, it's one of my favorite games of all time. For me, it took Spyro the Dragon and improved upon it in every single way. It increased the scope of the gameplay by granting new abilities and elevating the difficulty through orb challenges. These different dynamics made the rhythm of gameplay a lot more varied from moment to moment, as every level isn't simply about finding dragons and treasure. No, instead, levels are threefold. Take the main path for the talisman, explore the optional areas for orb challenges, and of course, grab up all the gems, which are more hidden here. The gems and talismans provide 2 concrete pathways that define each stage, while the orb challenges allows the variety to shine by constantly offering up new minigames, almost none of which feel similar. In other words, you never know what you're going to get when you enter a level, and that mystery and eventual payoff remains as mesmerizing as it was when I first played as a kid. Sure, I've pretty much memorized what each level will ask of me, but I know it will always be something different than before, while still capitalizing on the same strong movement and attack mechanics. And tying in the power-up gates to each level was another fine addition that adds to the variety. Most importantly, the gameplay never feels like it's overindulging on a single idea or a single mechanic, allowing for a freshness to endure throughout the entire journey. Of course, Ripto's Rage took things further by altering the mood and atmosphere of what came before. That's not to take anything away from Spyro the Dragon, its lonely and somber worlds provided a different sort of experience, one that felt almost spiritual. The pendulum has swung the other way here. A simple story paired up with memorable and lovable characters provides the game with an unreal amount of charm. That, paired up with stage-specific cutscenes, give you a real sense of how whimsical the world of Avalar is. They help guide and structure the adventure without feeling like constant interruptions. The balance there was just so perfect. It's unfortunate then that Toys for Bob was only able to recreate the great gameplay and not the atmosphere, as the Reignited Trilogy's version of Spyro's first sequel is lacking on those presentational elements. While some minor improvements have been achieved, on the whole, much of the original's delightful nature has been lost in translation, as the team, including voice actors, weren't quite able to recapture the magic. Still, with the Spyro license and IP rights being so muddied, it's nice to have a remake like this. There's no simple way to play the original games short of pirating them, and this makes for a nice substitute to that. It's a way for the games to at least endure even if they aren't quite as special as the originals. At least for me, it provides a way to revisit one of my favorite games of all time, and for that, I'll be forever grateful. I guess what's most special to me about Ripto's Rage is how it was the very first video game that I got lost in as a kid. That feeling of immersion was so strong even back then, and it's a sensation I still get every time I play the game. It allows me to go backwards in time to simpler days and just get lost in a fun and magical world without any of the stresses of real life. And that sense of relaxation persists whether I'm just soaking in the vibes of the homeworlds, chatting up NPCs, taking on tough orb challenges, or just blasting my way through a stage. It is all an escape, and it was my first escape, and it's one that I'm always grateful for the chance to revisit. Thanks for watching. Alright y'all, you gotta let me know what you think about Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage in the comments below. Whether you want to talk about the original or something here in the Reignited version, I'd be glad to hear what you're thinking. I do my best to respond to as many comments as I can, especially ones that are thought-provoking, so please more of those. And that's one of my favorite things about making videos in general, especially about games like this where I love them so much, is just hearing from people that love them equally as much. We're all going to have different perspectives on different parts of the game, and I want to hear yours, so please let me know. I'm sure that in the next year, I'll be covering Year of the Dragon as well, so that's exciting. There's rumors that Toys for Bob is working on a new Spyro game, and I'd really like to complete the look at this trilogy before that game comes out, if it's real, so be on the lookout for a continuation of this series with Year of the Dragon. Again, I wish I could have looked at the original game for this video and the other videos, but I had to make do with what was available to me, so I thank you for understanding that if you decided to watch the video, even despite using the new footage. And if you did enjoy the video, or even if you didn't, I greatly appreciate you taking the few hours it took to sit through the whole thing. And if you did like it and you want to support me further, you can always become a channel member for only $1 a month, leave a super thanks, or donate on Buy Me a Coffee. The links for all of that can be found in the description below, as well as in the pinned comment. Those donations are always appreciated, and it helps fuel this passion project of mine. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, donate if you want, and as always, have a nice day, and take care.